The landlord's voice crackled through my phone like static electricity before a storm. Miss Holloway, I'm going to be honest with you, in 15 years of renting properties, I've never seen a credit score this low. I laughed, assuming it was a mistake, until he read the number, 340. 340. The kind of number that doesn't happen by accident, the kind of number that takes years of deliberate financial destruction to achieve. I was 23 years old. I had never owned a credit card. I had never taken out a loan. I had never financed a car, opened a store account, or bought anything I couldn't pay for in cash. I had spent my entire adult life being careful, responsible, paranoid even, because I had grown up watching my mother drown in debt and I swore I would never be like her. So how was my credit score lower than some people's bowling averages? There must be some kind of error, I said, my voice steady even as my hands started to shake. Can you tell me what's on the report? He sighed. The kind of sigh that told me he'd seen this before, not the error, but the denial. I stopped breathing. Miss Holloway? Are you still there? That's not possible, I whispered. I'm 23. How could I have a foreclosed house? How could I have 3 bankruptcies? He paused. The oldest account was opened when you were 6 years old. I don't remember driving to my mother's house. I don't remember parking the car or walking up the cracked concrete steps I climbed 10,000 times as a child. I don't remember knocking on the door or waiting for her to answer. My memory picks up with her face, that familiar face with the same tired eyes and thin-lipped smile, and the words that came out of my mouth like venom. What did you do to me? She didn't even flinch. She stepped aside and let me in, like she'd been expecting this visit for 17 years. The house smelled the same as it always did, stale cigarettes and lavender air freshener, a combination that still makes me nauseous to this day. The furniture was new, I noticed. Leather couch. Flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. A fancy coffee maker on the kitchen counter that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Sit down, Gemma, she said, settling into the leather couch like a queen on her throne. You're being dramatic. Dramatic? I pulled up the credit report on my phone, the one I downloaded after hanging up with the landlord, the one that read like a horror novel. There are 17 credit cards in my name. 17. The first one was opened in 2007. I was 6 years old, Mom. 6. She lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and blew the smoke toward the ceiling. And, I was screaming now, something I never did. I was the quiet one, the good one, the daughter who never caused trouble because trouble always seemed to find our family anyway. You stole my identity. You committed fraud. You destroyed my credit before I even learned what credit was. My mother looked at me with an expression I'll never forget, not anger, not guilt, not even defensiveness. It was annoyance. Pure, undiluted annoyance, like I was a telemarketer interrupting her favorite show. I gave you life, she said slowly, enunciating each word like I was stupid. I fed you. I clothed you. I kept a roof over your head when your father walked out and left us with nothing. This is what you owe me, Gemma. This is the least you could do. I stared at her. This woman who had braided my hair for school pictures. Who had taught me to ride a bike in the parking lot of our apartment complex. Who had held me when I cried after my first heartbreak and told me I deserved better than any boy who couldn't see my worth. This woman who had apparently been destroying my financial future since I was in first grade. The least I could do? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. You took out credit cards in my name when I was learning to read. You bought a house using my social security number when I was 9. You filed for bankruptcy 3 times, using my identity. I'm 23 years old, and I have nearly $1 million in debt I didn't even know about. She shrugged. You'll figure it out. You're smart. You always were the smart one. Something broke inside me then. Not my heart, that would come later, in waves, over months and years. This was something else. This was the death of a fantasy I hadn't even known I was holding on to, the fantasy that my mother loved me more than she loved herself. I'm going to the police, I said. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Fear? No. It was calculation. She was calculating her odds, measuring my threat level, deciding how to play this. You won't, she said finally, crushing out her cigarette. I'm your mother. You're not going to send your own mother to prison. I turned and walked out without another word. The detective assigned to my case was a woman named Patricia Okonkwo. She had gray streaks in her black hair, reading glasses perpetually perched on her nose, and a handshake firm enough to crack walnuts. She'd been working financial crimes for 22 years. She told me, within 5 minutes of reviewing my file, that this was the worst case of parental identity theft she had ever seen. Usually we see 1 or 2 accounts, she explained, spreading documents across her desk like a dealer laying out cards. A desperate parent opens a credit card during a rough patch, promises themselves they'll pay it back, never does. It's wrong, but it's contained. This? She gestured at the mountain of paperwork. This is systematic. This is calculated. This is 17 years of deliberate financial abuse. I had spent the previous week gathering evidence. Bank statements I'd obtained through fraud alerts. Credit reports from all 3 bureaus. A timeline I'd pieced together through old receipts, account opening dates, and the scattered memories of a childhood I was now viewing through an entirely different lens. The first credit card was opened 3 months after my father left. I was 6. My mother had told me we were starting fresh, and that everything would be okay as long as we stuck together. What she didn't tell me was that starting fresh meant using my pristine social security number to open a Visa with a $5,000 limit. By the time I was 8, there were 4 cards in my name totaling $23,000 in debt. By 10, she had purchased a house in Henderson, Nevada, using my identity for the mortgage application because her own credit was already destroyed. I remember visiting that house once. She told me it belonged to a friend. She let me pick out the color for the guest room. I chose lavender. I was so excited. She lost the house to foreclosure 2 years later. I was 12, starting 7th grade, worrying about acne and whether Tommy Morrison would notice me at the school dance. I had no idea that somewhere in Nevada, a house with a lavender guest room was being repossessed in my name. The bankruptcies came next. 3 of them, strategically timed. My mother had learned the system well. She knew exactly how long to wait between filings, exactly how to manipulate the courts, exactly how to make herself disappear on paper while leaving my name attached to the wreckage. She used your social for everything, Detective Okonkwo said, shaking her head. Utility bills. Cell phone accounts. Car loans. There's even a boat. A boat? A fishing boat. Purchased in 2019, repossessed in 2021. Did you know about this? I thought back to 2019. I was 20, working 2 jobs to put myself through community college, eating ramen 5 nights a week to save money. My mother had visited me once that year, taken me out to dinner at a nice restaurant, and paid with a credit card I now realized was probably in my name. No, I said. I didn't know about any of this. Detective Okonkwo leaned back in her chair and studied me with an expression I couldn't read. You understand that pressing charges means this goes to trial. It means testifying against your mother. It means the whole world knowing what she did. I know. Some victims don't want that. Some victims would rather just clean up the mess quietly. File disputes, work with creditors, spend the next decade rebuilding. It's hard, but it's private. I thought about the apartment I'd lost, the one I'd saved 18 months for, the one with the bay window and the little balcony where I was going to grow tomatoes. I thought about the landlord's voice, the pity in it, the assumption that I was just another irresponsible young person who'd made bad choices. I thought about my mother, sitting on her leather couch, smoking her cigarettes, telling me I owed her. I want to press charges, I said. Detective Okonkwo nodded slowly. Then she did something unexpected. She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. Good, she said. You're doing the right thing. The months between filing charges and the trial were the loneliest of my life. My mother's side of the family closed ranks immediately. Aunts who had sent me birthday cards every year suddenly couldn't remember my address. Cousins who had commented heart emojis on my Instagram posts unfollowed me without a word. My grandmother, my sweet, soft-spoken grandmother who had taught me to make pie crust from scratch, sent me a letter saying I was tearing the family apart and she would pray for my soul. I read that letter 17 times. I still have it, folded in a box in my closet, a reminder of what loyalty looks like when it's pointed in the wrong direction. The only person who stood by me was my older brother, Marcus. Marcus had escaped our mother's orbit early. He joined the army at 18, served 2 tours overseas, and came back with a wife, a baby, and a healthy sense of boundaries. He lived in Texas now, far enough away that our mother's gravitational pull couldn't reach him. She did it to me too, he told me during one of our late-night phone calls. Not as bad as you, just a couple of credit cards when I was in basic training. I found out when I tried to buy my first car. But I confronted her privately, threatened to report her, and she paid it off. I thought that was the end of it. Why didn't you tell me? He was quiet for a long moment. Because I wanted to believe she'd changed. Because you were still a kid and I didn't want to poison your relationship with her. Because I was a coward. His voice cracked. I'm sorry, Gemma. I should have warned you. It's not your fault, I said, even though some small, bitter part of me wasn't sure that was true. She's the one who did this. Not you. I should have protected you. You were 20 years old and overseas. You didn't know. I suspected. The silence between us was heavy with all the things we couldn't change. Are you going to testify? He asked finally. Yes. I'll be there. I'll fly in. I'll sit in the front row, and I'll be there. He kept that promise. The trial lasted 4 days. My mother pleaded not guilty, of course. Her defense attorney, paid for by my grandmother, I later learned, argued that I had given her permission to use my social security number. That we had been partners in managing household finances. That the accounts were joint in nature, even though they were opened when I was a child who couldn't legally consent to anything. It was absurd. It was insulting. It was also, according to her lawyer, entirely plausible. I testified on the second day. I wore a navy blue dress that Marcus's wife had helped me pick out, something professional but not cold, serious but not severe. I sat in the witness box and answered questions for 3 hours, recounting dates and figures and transactions until my throat was raw. The prosecutor asked me what I remembered about the year 2007, when the first account was opened. I was in first grade, I said. I remember learning to read. I remember my teacher, Mrs. Patterson, giving me a gold star because I finished a chapter book by myself. I remember my father leaving and my mother crying and telling me it was just going to be us now. I remember thinking that was okay, because I loved her and I thought she loved me. Did you know about any credit accounts in your name during that time? I was 6 years old. I didn't know what a credit account was. Did your mother ever mention using your social security number for financial purposes? No. Never. Not until I confronted her last year. The defense attorney tried to rattle me during cross-examination. He implied that I was exaggerating. He suggested that I had spent some of the money myself and was now shifting blame. He asked, with theatrical incredulity, why I had waited so long to check my credit report if I was such a responsible young woman. I kept my voice steady. I answered every question truthfully. I did not cry, even when he called me ungrateful. Even when he asked if I thought I was too good for the family that raised me. I think, I said slowly, that no child should grow up to find out their parents stole their future. I think that's not love. I think that's theft. I think my mother made a choice, over and over again, for 17 years, to hurt me for her own benefit. And I think she should face the consequences of that choice. The courtroom was silent. The defense attorney had no more questions. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Marcus sat beside me in the hallway, his hand gripping mine so tightly I could feel his pulse. We didn't talk. There was nothing left to say. We just waited, 2 children who had grown up in the same house and somehow ended up on opposite sides of a woman who had failed us both. When the verdict came in, I stood on legs that felt like water. Guilty on 14 counts of identity theft. Guilty on 11 counts of fraud. Guilty on 3 counts of bankruptcy fraud. Guilty, 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 the word repeated like a drumbeat until it lost all meaning. My mother didn't look at me. Not once. She stared straight ahead, her face frozen in an expression of dignified martyrdom, like Joan of Arc at the stake. She had perfected that look over the years, the suffering mother, the misunderstood woman, the victim of circumstances beyond her control. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Harrison was a stern-faced man in his 60s with a reputation for being fair but unforgiving. He had reviewed all the evidence, heard all the testimony, and spent considerable time questioning my mother about her choices. She had remained defiant to the end. I did what I had to do to survive, she said during her statement. I was a single mother. I had no help. No support. No one understands what I went through. Judge Harrison was unmoved. Mrs. Holloway, he said, I have presided over hundreds of fraud cases in my career. I have seen desperation drive people to terrible choices. I have seen poverty push good people past their breaking points. But I have never seen a mother systematically destroy her own child's financial future with such deliberate, sustained cruelty. He paused, letting the words settle. You didn't make one mistake in a moment of weakness. You made hundreds of deliberate choices over 17 years. You opened accounts when she was 6. You bought property when she was 9. You filed bankruptcies when she was 11, 14, and 18. You used your daughter like a credit card, swiping her identity whenever you wanted something, leaving her to deal with the debt. My mother opened her mouth to respond, but Judge Harrison raised his hand. I am sentencing you to 18 months in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. Upon release, you will be required to make full restitution to your daughter, and you will be prohibited from opening any financial accounts without court supervision for a period of 10 years, 18 months. No parole. I watched 2 officers lead my mother away. At the last moment, just before she disappeared through the door, she turned and looked at me. Her eyes were hard, glittering with something that might have been hatred or might have been regret, I couldn't tell, and I realized I didn't care anymore. I had spent my whole life trying to read her. Trying to understand her. Trying to love her in a way that would make her love me back. I was done. The aftermath was both harder and easier than I expected. Harder because clearing my name took nearly 2 years. 2 years of disputes and appeals and paperwork. 2 years of explaining my situation to skeptical creditors who had heard every excuse in the book. 2 years of watching my credit score inch upward like a glacier moving toward the sea, slow, grinding, relentless. Easier because for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying a secret I didn't even know I had. The weight of my mother's betrayal, once exposed, began to lift. Not all at once, some days it pressed down so hard I couldn't breathe, but gradually, incrementally, like sunlight burning through fog. I found an apartment eventually. Not the one with the bay window and the balcony, but a decent place with good light and a landlord who reviewed my case personally and said, "Kid, you've been through enough. Welcome home." I started therapy. I joined a support group for survivors of parental identity theft. Yes, that's a thing, and no, I had no idea how common it was until I sat in a room with 12 other adults who had lived my exact nightmare. I rebuilt. Not just my credit score, though that too. I rebuilt my understanding of love, of family, of what I owed and what I deserved. I learned that obligation isn't love, that sacrifice isn't always noble, that some debts are manufactured by people who want to control you. My mother served 14 months of her sentence. She was released early for good behavior, ironic, given that good behavior had never been her strong suit. She tried to contact me once, a letter forwarded through my grandmother, full of the same old justifications and guilt trips. I didn't read past the first paragraph. I didn't need to. I burned it in my kitchen sink, watched the ashes swirl down the drain, and made myself a cup of tea. Last month, I bought a house. A real house, with my real credit, in my real name. Nothing fancy, a 2-bedroom cottage in a quiet neighborhood with a yard big enough for a garden. The mortgage approval came through on a Tuesday afternoon, and I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, crying tears I didn't know I still had. Marcus flew in for the closing. He brought his wife and their 2 kids, my niece and nephew, who call me Auntie Jem and think I'm the coolest person alive because I let them eat ice cream before dinner. We stood in the empty living room, sunlight streaming through windows that belonged to me, really, truly, legally belonged to me, and Marcus put his arm around my shoulder. "You did it," he said. "We did it," I corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." He shook his head. "You could have. You would have. That's who you are, Gemma. That's who you've always been." I thought about the girl I used to be, the 6-year-old who trusted her mother completely, the teenager who worked 2 jobs to avoid asking for help, the 23-year-old who discovered her entire financial identity had been stolen by the person who was supposed to protect her. I thought about the woman I had become, stronger than I knew, harder than I wanted to be, but healing. Always healing. "I'm going to plant tomatoes," I said suddenly, the words surprising even me. Marcus laughed. "What? In the backyard? I'm going to plant tomatoes. I've wanted to do that for years." He squeezed my shoulder. "Then that's exactly what you should do. My credit score is 761 now. It took 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days to get there. I know because I tracked every single point, celebrated every small victory, mourned every setback that wasn't my fault. 761 isn't perfect. It's just not the pristine 850 I might have had if my mother had never touched my social security number. But it's mine. Every point of it is mine, earned through patience and persistence and the stubborn refusal to let someone else's choices define my future. Sometimes people ask me if I regret pressing charges. If I wish I had handled it privately, kept the family together, protected my mother from consequences she earned. I tell them the truth, I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my mother made choices that forced me to choose between my future and her freedom. I regret the family relationships I lost, the grandmother who died without speaking to me again, the cousins who still think I'm the villain of this story. But I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret demanding accountability. I don't regret teaching my mother, and myself, that love doesn't mean letting someone destroy you. Some debts aren't meant to be paid. Some debts are invented by people who want to own you. And some debts, the real ones, the ones that matter, can only be settled by walking away from the people who created them. I owe my mother nothing. I owe myself everything. And I'm finally, starting to pay that debt in full.